We've come today to Blakesley Hall, which is accessed via this rather nice modern designed visitors centre. Blakesley Hall in Birmingham is just off a normal street, but this really nice impressive 1590s merchant's house was a nice afternoon out. So welcome to Blakesley Hall. This is in Yardley in Birmingham. Blakesley Hall was built in 1590 by Richard Smallbrook. His name is commemorated in Birmingham in the term Smallbrook Queensway, which is a ring road named after him. The house has a main entrance through which most of the family and visitors would have entered, but unusually has a second entrance through which merchants and businessmen could arrive, as this room on the lower left was used as his business facilities to wine and dine them. Richard Smallbrook made his money in spices, and when he built this building, the external structure that we see is purely decorative, but there's the herringbone pattern on the second floor, another pattern right up in the apex of the roof, and a cloister pattern downstairs. None of this is actually structural and is just there for decoration and showing off. You notice also that for Elizabethan house there's a large number of windows, and although the windows would not have been as big, they certainly would have all been there. When you died in those days, you sometimes even left your windows in your will because they were so expensive. The porch is an impressive addition to the building because it would have cost Richard more money as it took up ground floor space. Underneath the wisteria over the main entrance, R and S for Richard and Smallbrook are still inscribed, along with a large iron nail which was deemed to fend off evil. This room is the high dining room, which Richard Smallbrook would have used to entertain businessmen. It even had a separate entrance, an unheard of amenity for a house of this period. The large fireplace has an indent on the right-hand side, which would have been used to keep the salt dry. Fabric coverings on the walls make it quite a comfortable room, but the small is somewhat understated. It's actually a massive room. It seems that the magpies were kept by the Tudors as pets. Bit bizarre. The ladies, of course, who weren't even allowed to hold property at this period, had their own separate rooms, so they didn't interfere, but they would go through and join the men later once the business was concluded. The parlour is a smaller room where leisure activities such as cards and games would have taken place. There's a rather tall grandfather clock. It does have a brass face, but it also has two hands, so it's a little bit more modern than the 1590 hall. This is the Great Hall, much higher ceilinged than the room next door. This main hall would have been where most of the social and day-to-day eating for the family would have occurred. The backboard of 1638 is a little bit later than the house. On the opposite side of the hall there are two little rooms. These have supplies in like a larder, but it's advertised that they made remedies, medicines and perfumes in this still room. The lady of the house would have acted as the doctor if anybody became ill, and may well have used herbs to make everything better. There's even what looks to be an underground cool room and a cider press in the next room. This is the bolting room, which was used to store flour and make bread dough. Bolting was the term to describe separating the flour from the bran. The Tudors consumed bread with every meal, so they had to make a lot of dough. The kitchen was added about 60 years after the house was built in 1590 and is a little on the rear of the building. It features a huge kitchen range, as well as modern cons like these racks held up in the air so that mice and vermin can't get to it quite so easily. The kitchen is conveniently located quite close to the Great Hall, which is just through this door. Let's go upstairs. The upstairs rooms are laid out with a museum, but one room is a bedroom. These original remnants were uncovered when bomb damage nearby loosened the plaster and date from when the house was built, and if restored may well have looked like these fabric hangings on the wall in another room. The beds are rather magnificent. This features a truckle bed which truckles underneath the bed, allowing for occasional use. You can see the wheels allowing that whole bottom deck to slide out. Clearly Richard Smallbrook was used to entertaining and needed the space for additional guests. Blakesley Hall is unusual in the fact that it has this corridor arrangement which links all the individual rooms with this extra space. But then Richard was building a high quality house and showing off his wealth. And this portion of the corridor acts a little bit like a long gallery. Even some of the upstairs rooms boast fireplaces, and these are much grander than we get in modern houses. The basic decoration and the difference in the beds indicate that this is much more like the servants' quarters. The mattresses are stuffed with straw and would have been in the attics, amongst the storage sack, cheeses and barrels of food. Most servants would have returned to their own homes at night, but housekeepers, cook and maid almost certainly would have lived on site. There's a pretty little lovely small room immediately above the porch that is laid out with a writing desk, and its south-facing window mops up the sun even today. Going down the back stairs, perhaps more likely to be used by the servants, it's a much narrower, less grand arrangement. The staircase comes past the massive internal chimney stacks, this one coming up from the kitchen below. And then we continue down and we find the first toilet, called a garderobe, which was the earliest form of the toilet at Blakesley Hall. Imagine somebody having to clean it out. No main drains in those days. Blakesley Hall is quite a compact building, set even today in a nice little well-manicured grounds. When built, of course, it would have been largely an open countryside, certainly not enclosed by the urban houses that surround it today. The large brick-built chimneys dominate the side of the house, and to the rear the kitchen elements are clearly a slightly later extension, being added about 80 years after the house was built in 1590. Even at the rear of the house, the opulence of the different forms of timber framing are continued, and the kitchen extension is conveniently located next to the walled garden, which perhaps one day would have yielded all the vegetables and herbs the house needed, but these days has a fantastic lavender bed and a sundial in it. This herb garden would have been essential in Tudor lifestyle. It would have supplied herbs for all kinds of uses, from brewing to medicine to washing, cleaning, cosmetics and beauty products. This is quite a large and very pleasant modern built visitors centre, which is edged on the corner of the gardens of Blakesley Hall. It's also the first time I've seen these chain links being used for a water downpipe. There is plenty of outdoor seating and sometimes a cafe, although this wasn't in operation the day I was here. We travelled in style, and this is how the afternoon went.